Hey everyone, this is Sarthak. Welcome back to the channel. In continuation with very irregular and inconsistent conversations that I keep on having with our mentors, today we have one of our most helpful and humble mentors who's also a college junior, Miss Riya Aggarwal. Riya has been a seasoned social impact consulting professional now. And in today's session, I'll ask her some pointed questions on how her experience has been, be it in GDI Partners, Central Square Foundation, or FSG, where she has joined recently. And how did she prepare for social impact interviews? Because there is a lot of opaqueness on how to prepare, how to get a hold of case interviews specific to social impact, and how are the interviews different from typical management consulting conversations. So let's get started. First question, Ria, for you is, uh, how was your stint with Central Square Foundation, and what exactly does the firm do?
Sure. So Central Square Foundation essentially works in the field of education. So they only work in education and different spheres. For example, they have a team in EdTech, educational technology. You have schools governance. You work in early childhood education, and something called FLN, which is foundational literacy and numeracy. So that's basically focus on kids studying between first to third grade. So how do you teach a kid how to read so that they can learn to read it so that they can read to learn in the future. So
Got it.
essentially it's all education, and a good chunk of their work is involved in research but also leveraging governments to get programs working.
Okay.
So when I worked in CSF, I was working with a team called the State Reform Team. So the idea is that FLN, which is Foundational Literacy and Numeracy, is a key tenet that CSF believes in. It's one of the most important things highlighted in the National Education Policy also. So the
Yeah.
idea is that the mission called Nippon Bharat Mission that we started, the idea being that we want every kid from the age of 6 to 8 be able to read and basically qualify certain learning outcomes that
Got
are
it.
defined by the government. So the idea is there's a mission and the state has to implement it. So we were
Mm.
essentially working in project management units. So the
Okay.
idea is that consultants work directly with state governments and they help them in implementing the mission through certain defined work streams and
Yeah.
also have some reform that can improve the system. So
Got it.
that is basically what I did. CSF as a whole, of course, they also work in other areas in education, but around 60-70% of the focus is on this work, which is
Okay.
FLN. So yeah.
Got it. So you work in collaboration with the state government specifically for improving learning outcomes for school-going students.
Correct. So, for
Okay.
example, in my case, I was working in the state of Uttar Pradesh.
Hmm.
So, I used to live out of Lucknow and I used to work out of the government office there. So, we used to work with the bureaucrats there, the officials who used to actually work on ground and get things going. So,
Okay.
providing them all support, helping them in the implementation of the mission, working with district officials also. So,
Okay.
that's what we do the day to day.
Very interesting. And how did you prepare for CSF interviews, and what were you asked in the interviews?
Sure. So in CSF, I think it helped that I came from a background where I worked in education. However, the interviews consisted of some case rounds that you have.
Okay.
So
Okay.
a case typically is something, it's kind of similar to your typical cases. However, for CSF, they didn't have any guesstimates of the lights.
Okay.
The idea is that they give you a real life problem statement. So one example could be that, okay, I want to implement a teacher training program in my state. So how do you go planning about it, right?
Oh,
So how do you actually, what is your thinking regarding this? Or one example could be that, okay, I want to send some materials on ground. So what are some things you would think of?
okay.
So real life problems they face on a day-to-day basis, and it's a live case where you're interacting with the person already working on field. So
Hmm.
that's one. You have your case interviews. The second is situational questions. So for project management roles, which is your roles at CSF, Samagra, and the likes as well. So situational questions are quite important because you're dealing with a lot of stakeholders on a daily basis. So you're dealing with people who are IS officers, you're dealing with people who are working in the government at comparatively middle levels. So you have to deal with them differently. You're working with district officials, you're working with funders. So the stakeholder management aspect becomes really important. So you might have situational questions that if
Hmm.
X happens, what would you do? And third is, of course, your resume based questions, right? The why of social impact. Why do you want to work here?
Got it.
Because I think that's one thing firms usually do look for in social impact. Even if you haven't worked in the space before, that's okay.
Mhm.
But there needs to be a clear why of
Got it.
pivot. So yeah,
Got
that's
it.
how the overall process looked like. For some people, there's also written assignment at the beginning.
Oh, got it. And how did you prepare? Because you also know it, I also know it, because all the case books available out there, be it from a business school or a corporate, is specifically for management consulting interviews, the likes of
Yeah.
profitability, market entry cases. So how
Yeah.
did you contextualize your preparation?
Sure. So I think one thing that's really beneficial, like you said, we don't have social impact cases
Mm.
listed down anywhere. So you don't have a resource to refer to. So one thing that becomes important is having a basics ready, having practice typical cases helps you structure a problem.
Yeah,
So I think first principles thinking is the way to go for social impact cases. However, if you basically just Google up some social impact frameworks, right? So you have something called theory of change. You have something called 3CP. So you can search that up also.
got
So I
it.
think that gives you a good start.
Yeah,
The other one is looking up case studies on the websites of some certain firms, right? So one, you have Bridgespan, which has provided some case studies like with full interview scripts that you can
wow,
read through.
wow.
Dalberg, FSG, they all have case studies on their websites.
Yeah,
And then when you are trying to customize the prep, for example, for CSF, one very essential thing is to go through their website.
got it.
So when I had to actually answer the question, if I do not know what field they're working in or what
Exactly.
is the area or what is FLN, I have no clue what that is. It would not be helpful. And one thing I've observed with most of these firms is that they provide you some heads up that, okay, these are some materials you can reference. So I think going for the basics is very important. Then reading up actual real life case studies because you do not have your typical segmentation available in the social impact sector. For every case, it will be different. So to be able to think immediately, if you have a little bit of a framework or some vocabulary that you can use, I think
Got it.
that helps also.
Very interesting. Glad that you mentioned FSD because my next question was, what made you shift to FSD and what does FSD do?
So So for me, I have been working in the social impact space for a while now. So my first stint was essentially management consulting in education and sustainability. So that was a lot of innovative work that I was doing. However,
Yeah,
I wasn't working at scale. So I hadn't worked with the government system yet. And in the impact sector, government system is quite big.
yeah.
So next was GDI and CSF, essentially CSF, where I got to work with the government. And the next step for me was also exploring the private market space, right? And how do you have impact creating business value, which is one of the things FSG also believes in, that for actually ensuring that there's some impact that is sustainable, you also need
Oh,
private markets to chip in. So I think that was one of the reasons, and one of the other reasons was that I wanted to explore more sectors also.
yeah.
I have worked in the education sector for quite a bit. So the
Mm,
idea was to see more sectors and get an idea of what they look like.
got it. And how does FSD function in terms of what did you prepare for and how was the interview?
Sure. So FSG was, and I think that could be like a little bit of an exemplar for some other consulting firms also. So it began with an aptitude test.
Okay.
So that is essentially your quant data integration and the likes that you have. Post your aptitude test, there are basically a couple of rounds of case interviews, depends on which position you're applying for. If you're applying for a slightly senior like situation, it's going to be 3, 4 rounds of interviews. If it's an associate, it might be two. So these are
Wow.
proper case round interviews with guesstimates built in. And you also might have some written rounds in the middle, like one written round perhaps. And if you're slightly senior, you might even be presenting something. So you might be
Oh,
creating a present. Yeah. So, but it's very case based. So the idea is that you have a full case happening for like an hour or so, and
okay.
the interview, it's a live interaction happening.
Hmm. Very interesting. And here also it was similar to teacher training programs and the likes or something totally different.
I would say it was a little bit different in the sense that it was a mix of your cases. So one case was actually a typical consulting case, which was essentially a social sector case, but a market sizing case, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So in that way, the only thing that was different was that a sector was maybe not an FMCG company or
Yeah.
someone else. firm working in the social sector, but that was a market sizing case.
Got
And
it.
the other is actually like, again, their real case, something they have worked on already. So
Hmm.
that's similar to your teacher training case. However, there were guesstimates built in. So there were many more numbers
Oh,
that I had to work with compared to CSF.
got it. Very interesting. And if somebody wants to decide on whether management consulting or social impact consulting, which career track they should pick as a fresher or as an early professional, what do you think they should rely upon to make this decision?
I think one thing that definitely helps is just reflection. I would say that I come from a management background as well. I come from a corporate setup. I was also not one of those people who was in the like, the inactive kind of society. I was in the corporate society for that matter. But I think one thing that helps is knowing that what drives you at work. My first stint was a corporate stint, but I realized that it's quite difficult for me to relate to just money. It's much more interesting for me to work in something which is a little bit more complex, right? And there's
Very nice.
no problem more complex than social sector problems, honestly. So I think that's one. The other is talking to people. Exposure really helps. I know I have talked to a lot of seniors about their work at different firms because, like you said, social sector can be a little opaque because this is still up and coming. So you might not have absolute visibility about the day to day of the work.
Very
So
true.
I think taking in as much information as you can, talking to people who are working in different firms, that is
Yeah.
very important. And third, honestly, experimentation. Like I feel like I'm trying to do it all to understand where I actually fit in. And I think people should be a little open to experimentation, especially early on in their career, so that they can
Got
see
it.
what fits in the best for them.
Got it. Last question for you. When I have to make a CV specific for social impact consulting firms, can I pick my management consulting CV which I've made, or should I do some tweaks?
To be very honest, I picked my original CV as it is, but I think I have the benefit of already been working in the sector for a bit.
Yeah.
I think typically, if you're applying for a consulting firm working in the social sector, your CV remains quite similar as it is, just cover letter changes quite a bit.
Okay.
I think that is the bigger difference because getting into these firms is as competitive as the other firms. So they are looking for your typical spikes. They're looking for the impact you've created wherever you have worked. So while of course having worked on a project related to what the firm is doing is good to have.
Yeah.
I don't think that's an absolute negator if you do not, have that on your CV. I would
Mm.
say that employing a cover letter alongside, which actually talks about the why of you applying. That is much more useful. But then, of course, if you have worked in the social sector before, if you
Yeah.
have some experience, for example, some interning experience with a government entity, Niti Aayog or something, I think it's useful to have that for sure. So if you
Got it.
have some experiences like that, definitely put them in also.
Got it.
However, I don't think anyone should not apply for a position if they've not worked in the sector before.
Got it. Understood. Thank you so much, Ria. Was lovely having this conversation with you, and thank you so much for your insights.
Happy to help.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.